start right now. I would like to welcome all of you to the 19th in a series of Zoom lectures sponsored by Congregation KINS. As you probably know by now, the speakers all have a STEM-related topic and a correlation with Torah. We are truly honored today to have Rabbi Sholem Fishbane as our speaker. Rabbi Fishbane attended Tel Yeshiva in Chicago, studied at the Mir Yeshiva in Israel for about 8 years, returned to the United States in 1997, where he worked in the Kashrus field for the OU, and also served as a congregational rabbi in Buffalo, New York. He has degrees from all over the place: University of Wisconsin, Tel Yeshiva, Or Sameach Tannenbaum College in Yerushalayim, and Bellevue University in Nebraska. He also has 4 separate smichas, one from Rabbi Kolitz, Chief Rabbi of Jerusalem, one from Tel Yeshiva, one from the Mir Yeshiva, and one from Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg's Jerusalem Beis Din. He also holds a teaching degree from the Ministry of Education in Israel and is certified as a shochet. Most of you probably are familiar with the fact that he is the director of Kashrus for the Chicago Rabbinical Council and is highly respected in his field for his expertise, his energy, and his dedication. In fact, under his guidance, the CRC has become one of the 5 leading Kashrus organizations in the world. In his spare time, Rabbi Fishbane also is the executive director of the Associated Kashrus Organizations, an umbrella organization of major Kashrus certifying agencies. Rabbi Fishbane and his wife have been married for 28 years. They have 7 children, and they live right here in Chicago. The rabbi's topic today is going to be kosher food manufacturing and Kashrus considerations. As always, you will have 2 opportunities to ask questions. You may feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt Rabbi Fishbane at any point in time while he's speaking.
In the future, you'll take me up on my
I'll also be giving you another opportunity after his presentation. Now, my pleasure to turn the program over to Rabbi Fishbane.
Thank you. I almost didn't recognize the person you're introducing. Wow.
That was an abbreviated bio.
Yeah, wow. Well, I hope to live up to that introduction. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to share with you some Torah and some practical, almost what we do here at the CRC every single day in combining, and it's the greatest job in the world, I must tell you, Steve, that to combine halacha and combine what we've learned in yeshiva with both the world of manufacturing and helping out the community as we can it's the ideal job, and I thank everyone at the CRC for making this happen. So it's very interesting. I want to start off with an unusual point. And that is, every person that has a job has in them, carries around their tools, okay? So a contractor will always have, I don't know, a hammer on his belt. A doctor will have the so everybody has something that relates to their job. Believe it or not, many of us that visit manufacturing plants, we carry along, ready for this? A piece of chocolate. Now, what does it have to do with anything? Please remind me. I want to get back to this because it's a very interesting and critical piece to what I want to talk about today. There's one particular banging in the background. I don't know if you hear it, but if it's okay, if someone can just mute on that. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. So what I want to talk about related to this piece of chocolate is the following. A manufacturer, the most important thing for a manufacturer to stay in business when they make products is energy. Energy is money. The more money you spend on creating energy to make a manufacturer product, the more money out of your budget. So they're always thinking of ways to save energy. And when you're a mashgiach of a factory, you need to think like an engineer. I always say, It used to be, maybe when many of us were growing up, and I don't think I'm the youngest here by many years, that to be a mashgiach, you had, of course, know your idea. You had to know a little bit here, a little bit over there, but it was kind of a job that people just fell into almost. Today, it's completely different. Completely different. The people that choose being a mashgiach, especially factory mashgichim, choose it because they, like I said earlier, they enjoy marrying the halacha and technology. But you have to be knowledgeable in your day. You have to be knowledgeable in engineering, in food science, chemistry, of course, psychology, and everything like that. So when we walk into a plant and we start looking, can we make this kosher or non-kosher? What's going on here? We always ask for the engineer to be in the room to study the systems creating the product. Okay, and briefly, the way it works is that I'm dealing at this very moment with several factories, actually one in Oman and one in Abu Dhabi, now that those countries have warmed up to doing kosher. So we're getting lots of questions from them. And the way basically it works is, as you can imagine, that when you heat up product, kosher product, you don't just look at that one product or that one line, everything there is kosher, but you look at the whole factory, because it's very possible a half a mile away at the end of the factory, they're making something non-kosher, but it very much could affect the kosher. And that is simply, and let's go into a little bit of explaining engineering. And that is, we all know, 1 pound of water equals 1 degree of Fahrenheit. So when you hit water, which is about 32 degrees Fahrenheit, obviously under 32 is ice, and you need to get it to 212, which is the right temperature to heat. So you need to add BTUs, which is energy, with between 32 and 212 is 180 BTUs in order to get it to the possible amount to heat. That's called sensible heat. Now that you're at 212, what you really want to do is find a way to take it from sensible heat to something called latent heat. Latent heat. Latent heat is pumping in enough energy into this 212 water, where if it hits product, it instantly cooks it. And you want to the point of factories is time, it's money, and you want to heat up things as quickly as you can. The best way to get latent heat is through steam, packing in so much koach into the hot water, into the steam, that when it hits your potato or whatever you're cooking up, that gets heated very quickly. So what they do is, in many factories, is they'll have, let's say, here's your, I don't know if you can see my, well, okay, well, forget that, I'll just have to animate. Bless you. In order to do this, what they do is they go ahead and they'll take steam, they heated it up, they got it really hot, they'll send it to, let's say, the soup kettle. The soup kettle has in it a double jacket, it's called a steam jacket, where the steam is running around outside the soup kettle, and it's heating up very hot with all these BTUs. With all the, it's actually 970 BTUs once you get from steam, from hot water to steam. So these 970 BTUs goes through the metal. Yeah, the energy goes through the metal and heats up the product on the other side. Okay. And now, obviously, as soon as it hits the cold surface, it turns and the BTUs transfers through. It loses the energy. The latent energy gets lost, and it turns back into water. So now, what they do is they take that water, they send it back to the boiler to get re-energized, so that it can once again keep doing it. And of course, and here's the way you save money if you're an engineer, is you don't want to always start from scratch in a boiler. You're just going to lose out a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of energy. Energy is money. So if you start off with hot water and not 32-degree water, so if it's coming back at, let's say, 190, 180, and you just got to raise it to the BTUs that you want, that you saved yourself a lot of money. So they're always sending the hot water or the steam back to the boiler, giving it another boost, sending it back to get heated up. And that is the way factories work. You never drop your condensate, you never drop your hot water, you never drop your steam, you keep reusing it. Okay, so and now follow through. So if you have, like this particular factory that I'm dealing with in Abu Dhabi, they are making mayonnaise, actually, for a very, very well-known company. But it happens to be that even though the kettles that are making the mayonnaise on one side of the plant, because all kettles in the plant, including the non-kosher ones, all the way on the other side, are making non-kosher, and those two kettles never see each other. However, because the steam that are being used in the jacketing both come back to the main boiler, and the steam gets mixed up and then goes back to everywhere, and it's one big boiler that feeds all of the places. So in essence, we have steam that is mixing up, that took on from the heated up the treif and also heated up the kosher. What's the problem with that? The problem is a very important halacha in Yeridea Simon Tzadik Beis that says the following: Tipas chol of shenofel al kedera. It's talking about you're in your home and you're making a cholent, and your grandchild is spritzing his milk bottle, and it spritzes out of the milk bottle right onto the outside of your cholent pot. And the halacha is very clear that flavor goes through metal, even though you don't see the milk traveling through, it's still sitting on the outside of your cholent pot. But halacha states that flavor goes through the metal. So now you have a milchiga flavor in your fleishiga cholent. And you look at the halachas over there, basically, you have to figure out how much went through. Is it batul b'shishim? How much milk fell on it? Above the line, above the line? We're not getting into all those halachas. I'm sure many of you on the phone, on Zoom today, have learned this halacha in Simon Tzadik Beis, but you can look at it again. But that's the basic understanding, okay? So therefore, we have a very important problem, because if we say that product flavor goes through metal, so the product that's made non-kosher, it goes through metal, the steam becomes non-kosher, goes back to the boiler, gets mixed with the steam that's about to be fed to our kosher boiler, that steam cannot be used to make kosher product. That's the problem. Now, I want to share with you a very live example that happened not too long ago. A fascinating story. Here in Chicago, we were asked to certify a hard-boiled egg factory. They make bulk hard-boiled eggs. They sell it to caterers, and they wanted us to make it kosher. Now, the first thing we need to think about before we even go down, does eggs need to be, eggs are eggs. As long as it comes from a chicken, is it kosher? What could go wrong with boiling eggs? So the way it is, the way they make their eggs is, they put it in, they drop the eggs in a bath. The bath is heated on the outside by steam, and they come out 25 minutes later hard-boiled. They get sprayed with cold water to cool them down, and then they get packaged. They get cracked and they get packaged, and everyone enjoys. Now, the first question, which is not our topic today, because, kashrus, we can spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about all the aspects. But the first question is, does it have to be cooked al yedei Yisrael, which is known as bishul Yisrael? In other words, are eggs considered ola al shulchan malachim? Is it something, well, as you know, there are two requirements to make something if required bishul Yisrael. One is if it's ola al shulchan malachim, is it served at we'll call it a fancy affair, a fancy dinner. And the second is if it's something that is einu nechal chai, it's something that's not eaten raw. So if you take an apple, which is eaten raw, and you decide to cook it, it doesn't need bishul yisrael. But if you take something like, I don't know, steak, which is cannot be eaten raw, it's not eaten raw, and you decide to cook it, it needs a yisrael's involvement in the cooking. So what about eggs? It's a fascinating discussion. Maybe if there's time, we'll come back to it. Because sometimes you can say, yeah, I don't know, scrambled eggs, nah, that doesn't go at a fancy dinner. Hard-boiled eggs, sliced up in a nice salad, maybe yes. What about fried eggs, a quiche? And as a matter of fact, in halacha, the Rambam talks about, let's say you're making challah, okay, and you're not having pas yisrael, so it's not pas yisrael. But then you take the egg and you egg the challah to give it that shine. Does that have to be bishul yisrael? These are the many halachas when it comes to these things. But bottom line is, we do say it is olal shulchan lachem, and we do discount those few chazanim in the world that like to drink raw eggs, that is not the norm, and therefore it does need to be bishul yisrael. So therefore we marched right to the boiler and said, let's figure out how to make this boiler bishul yisrael. So every time they turn on the egg machine, that it's bishul yisrael. That was our challenge. So lo and behold, we went to the boiler here in Chicago, and so the first thing we did is we're going to turn on the boiler. Now the halacha is once we turn it on and it stays on, it remains our koach Yisrael, bishul Yisrael, for a long time. And therefore, it can be even weeks. As long as you don't turn it off, it remains in our koach. By the way, that's what we do in the local Dunkin' Donuts. We turn on the oven so the bagel should be pas Yisrael, and we monitor that it never goes off. It's not for today's discussion. Maybe another time we can talk about how we do that. But one of the ways we do it in the factory is we put on something called a log tag data logger, which is stuck on the boiler, and it electronically feeds data to our computers in the CRC office to let us know that the boiler is still at the right temperature. As soon as it drops, we get an alert. Uh-oh, it's dropping, which means you can't make your eggs. You need to run down. Something happened to the boiler. We got to turn it back on again. And that's one of the ways, aside, of course, the mashgiach visiting all the time, but that's one of the ways we monitor this, okay? What we discovered was a fascinating thing. This company, in order to save money, was actually sharing their boiler with a factory, maybe a block away, whatever it was. And lo and behold, guess what they were making in that factory? They were actually curing pork. Okay? So, and we have a very interesting case. We have our first known case of bishul yisrael pork. Okay? Because we made the boiler bishul yisrael by turning it on and monitoring it, and because of that, the pork was bishul yisrael, not allowed to be eaten, obviously, but there was a cute thing. So we look carefully how they make it, and we noticed that the way they cure and they make the pork was by hanging the pork over these steam lines, and the steam, of course, was sent back to the boiler. And now the boiler was indeed utilizing both the steam from the pork, the steam from the eggs, mixing it back up, and then so we had a big problem. Now, let me just talk about scientifically for a second, okay? And maybe I'll pause for some questions, and then I'll get to how we resolved all this. The problem is, or the challenge, I don't want to say problem because we're dealing with halacha, but the challenge was that, how they used to make metal? They used to take a sheet of metal, bang it into the shape of a pot. The banging certainly left microscopic holes. And that was basically when Chazal looked at blios, flavor, going through the walls, they understood the way metal was made. And therefore, yes, flavor is going to go through the walls of metal, and that's why you have the halacha and tzaddik beis of tipas cholav shenafal akdeira. But today, they don't do it that way. The way they make metal today is they liquefy metal and they shape it in a compact way that there's absolutely no holes. And companies make sure they don't want holes, they don't want leakage in their product. And therefore, and we always taste to make sure that there's no product coming through. So how can we, as a matter of fact, the Shach in Tzadach says you're allowed to have Timas Yisrael, means the Yisrael is allowed to taste, make sure no metal flavors coming through. So why is this halacha? Why are we so concerned if today's metal might be different? This isn't my question. Rabbi Yisrael Belsky, Zichrono Livracha, in 1979, posed this question to the great Rav Moshe Feinstein. And Rav Moshe told him orally, he said it to him, and Rav Belsky told it to me, that just because we figure out something today scientifically doesn't give us the right to erase an entire siman in Shulchan Aruch. And it works both ways. So for example, not so long ago, they found worms in fish, an Anisakis worm, okay? There was a big tumult and people stopped eating herring, which is one of the hardest things for Klal Yisrael to exist without herring, and a whole tumult. It's in Shulchan Aruch. This is not a new worm. The same thing with raisins. I remember, and still people don't eat raisins because if you soak it enough times, you'll find that the bugs that died, or the aphids and the thrips or the flies, whatever it is, the Taz already talked about it. And it works both ways. In other words, we stick with Shulchan Aruch and we try to adapt, but we'll never be oker completely a sin in Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, Rav Moshe told him, you cannot say, well, maybe today's metal is a little different, therefore you don't have to worry about Tipo Shenafel there. However, he gave him permission to be more creative in figuring out ways how to resolve these issues because of today's metal is a little different. And before I get into those, I think with your permission, we can maybe open for some questions. If there are no questions, I'll get into some of the solutions.
Anyone? If not, then Rabbi, you can resume.
Okay, thank you. So how do we resolve this? And this is every day, okay? It is also the understanding of how, as I said earlier, how energy is made and how to follow steam systems and lines is what separates the men from the boys, as they say, in who is a good hashkach. One of the hardest jobs I have is determining which hashkachas we accept to our standards. And many times we'll have to, you'll call us here, say, and such hashkacha good. We'll say, not recommended. Why not? I happen to know that rabbi. He's very learned, long beard, big tzaddik, absolutely. But he's also not educated enough in today's manufacturing. Maybe he doesn't even English might not be his first language. He doesn't understand the chemistry. One of my first experiences, I was actually back in Buffalo. I walked into a factory that was making, there was we'll call it a Heimish product being made in this factory. And they were doing it with hashkacha tzmidis. There was a rabbi there from that hashkacha watching them make this product. And I said to him, how did you kosher this machine? This factory makes, they made a soup, what do they call those? They make, beef stock, a treif. And it goes through this machine and, basically it has to do with the engineering piece. He completely didn't know about he didn't know what I was talking about. So he got his rabbi on the phone and we worked it out. And basically, in order for him to continue, I helped this rabbi go. We drained the boiler completely because of this problem that I've been talking about. And they were able to restart it. Draining the boiler, by the way, is not hours, it's days. Because imagine, you have to get rid of the water and you got to restart and get all that energy back in. It was a huge problem. So that's why many times we'll say something's not recommended. It doesn't mean that we have anything personal against them, nor does it mean that they're not learned, but it does mean many times that they're not educated enough in manufacturing today. Okay, so basically, the way Rav Belsky, was able to. Well, let me tell you. So what Rav Belsky did is, therefore, he figured out that, look, let's figure out like this. We do agree that that 100% of the flavor is not going in, because if 100% would be transferred with the steam, it would taste like whatever you make. We also know that we have a halacha of shisha, 1/6, when it comes to stam yenim, yayim nesech, that we're given that amount, which is about 14%. It's not at that percent either. So therefore, Belsky was comfortable with saying that let's assume there's a 10%, there's 10% of product, which is under the 14%, which halacha sets. It's way under the 100%, which we would taste. The 14% is that's what causes the product, so it would look like it at least. And he says we know we have to assume al pi halacha that 10% is going through. Now, when you're working with that number, it's way over shishim, which is 1.6. So when you're working with that number, you can look at the formula. Let's say the non-kosher, let's say you're making a parv product and the dairy product was only 5%. You have what to work with. Now, this is just math. It's just engineering. In practice, though, because the CRC is trying to give a hechsher for everybody, and just because we may decide that dairy is considered kosher today, because Rav Moshe says that all dairy today in America it doesn't need to be Chol Yisrael, but because we're writing parv, we keep in mind the Hasidim, and those that even consider dairy completely non-kosher don't agree with Rav Moshe. So we'll look at it as treif, and therefore we're not going to give a hechsher based on numbers. But here is what we do, and we do this every day, and I'm going to get to the chocolate piece. There are several ways to address this problem. The first way is to cut off the steam return from the non-kosher. So we'll go, in this case, we'll go to the ham place, we'll follow the line, and when it gets to be what's called the return condensate, there's right near the boiler, we cut the line, put the line into the drain, and therefore all of the steam that's coming back from the boiler, from the treif side, goes to the drain, and we put in there a probe. And the probe is constantly telling our computers that there's still hot water going through. Once it goes cold, we know that somebody played with it. We also seal the cutoff part to make sure that it doesn't get sealed. And there was one time I remember in a factory where the inspector came in, he didn't like it was sealed, the whole story. He made them reconnect it, and that week's product therefore was non-kosher. So we do several, but that's one way. Now the company has to make a decision. They have to decide, is the energy and the money lost by going with kosher program, by cutting off the energy line for the non-kosher side, worth it for our sales of the kosher department? That's a decision they have to make, and that goes into the economics of kosher. The second way is, and this is where the chocolate comes in, is we add a pagima. We add in something distasteful into either the steam line or to the water that's the medium, the hot water medium that transfers the product onto the other side. Why is that? Because the halacha is, I'm sure everybody knows the concept of an einu ben yomo, 24 hours. If something's more than 24 hours old, the flavor becomes distasteful, it becomes stale. Halacha is not concerned about that. Once something is not potent, it doesn't have a good taste, halacha is not worried. So if steam is carrying treif product and it's going to the other side, but the media in between the steam and the product being cooked, so let's say it's hot water, so steam is heating up hot water, hot water is heating up product. If we're able to put in a pegima, something distasteful, it cancels out the trait for flavor. Now, what do we use? We use the most bitter substance that is known to mankind. And that's the product called Bitrix, B-I-T-R-E-X, Bitrix. I think it's made in England. It's quite expensive. Whoa, is that powerful. They created it to put it into poison so that kids that might want to, drink something on the, not knowing it's poison, little babies, as soon as they taste it, they'll completely spit it out and they'll never ingest it and harm themselves. I think they even put it on some barks of certain trees so that the animals don't eat it. That's what I was told. So it's the most bitter compounded agent there is out there, and it's safe. In other words, it's okay to use. I was dealing last month with a company in Poland as well as in Brazil. They want to make product for us. And I told them you have to put Bitrix in your hot water loop. And they got really scared. But after researching it more, they realized that it's okay to do. Now, how do we know that the water is still distasteful, still poigin? And here's what we walk in. We walk into the factory. Would you like a cup of coffee? They'll say to us, no. Can you do me a favor? Go to the boiler and open the spigot. Give me a taste of the boiler water, please. What? Yep, that's what we need to do for kosher. They'll bring me the boiler water, or I'll do it myself. And I'll put my finger in. And if I taste that Bitrix, I know that whatever else is going on in the factory doesn't affect my product. However, I gotta tell you, once you taste Bitrix, you can't taste anything else for a couple of days. And the only thing that actually takes away the Bitrix flavor is a bar of chocolate. That is why chocolate is one of the things rabbis that visit factories on a consistent basis needs to go ahead, and that's why we carry some chocolate in our factories. So there are other ways. I'll give you one other way and a little bit more advanced. The halacha that flavor goes through a wall is only if it's wet. Only if it's wet. Tipos cholav shenafel al kedera is because it's wet on both sides. So we get creative. What we'll do is we'll make a double plate. A pasteurizer is made up of many plates. If we take the product on one side and the hot water or the steam on the other side, but we add a double plate, so in between the two, even though there's energy going through, but it's dry, then we're okay. So these are other innovative ways that we will try to make something. In other words, take away the moisture between the walls. That's how we deal with tipos cholav shenafel out there. Okay, there's a lot more to say about these entire things, but I think I've hopefully given you an appreciation and an introduction into some of the background of what it goes to make a product kosher today on an industrial commercial level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Special thank you to Rabbi Fishbane for a fascinating presentation today. Thanks to all of you who are participating in the Zoom meeting. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a question for the rabbi, now would be the time to unmute yourself and ask it. Anyone? If not, then I would like to announce that the next STEM meeting will be 1 week from today, January 19th at noon, and the speaker will be Howard Karish, who will be speaking on the following topic: playing with fire, an overview of the laws of cooking and warming food on Shabbos. And as always, if you go to the KINS website, you will always be able to tell what the upcoming topic is and who the speaker will be. Again, thank you all very much for participating, and we hope to see you next week.
Where on the KINS website are the previous lectures?
There is if you go into the KINS website at the top, there's a title that says Doesn't say previous lectures. I think it says online videos or something like that. And you have to search by the date. Like if you look on today's date, you'll find today's topic and a link to the video. So it's right on the top of the main website.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
This is so interesting. Thank you, Rabbi Fishbane. May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Are you essentially sacrificing yourself, not just taste-wise, but kashrut-wise, when you taste the water to make sure the bitrix is still in it? Isn't it tray for you if it isn't?
Right, great question. So as I said earlier, that there's a shach inside a ches. You know, let's say you're on a, I'm not swallowing, so that's a very important. Like there's a halachas about, let's say you're on a fast day and you're cooking and you need to see if there's enough salt, right? So there's a shaila if you're allowed to taste it and spit it out, right? And it's not for today's subject, but the concept of te'ima without swallowing is allowed, especially if it's only a suffix. You're hopeful that it is. So honestly, all I do is I put my finger and I go like that, and right away I can tell it's really strong. To be even more honest, I am not. It's the wrong word, but I usually by the time it gets to my finger, I could smell if it's there or not. It is permissible. You know, I'll tell you an example, a very interesting example. We were doing a Pesach hotel not too long ago, and the meat that was sent to us was lacking the proper simanim. We weren't sure if it was the kosher or not, frankly, and we didn't know what to do. So there was a siman. It wasn't a great siman. So one of the things we did was, and this isn't the only way because it can only be starved with other things, but you put your finger on it. Is there a salty taste? Non-kosher meat, they don't salt. Kosher meat, they salt, and that's actually brought down in halacha like that. So there is a permissibility to taste without swallowing it to determine something if it's a suffix.
Thank you. I don't want to hog this if there are other questions, but I do have a tangential question if there
Sure.
aren't any other questions.
Sure.
So when you're talking about things spritzing, I always wonder about my tea kettle, my china. Like, how do other people deal with this?
You're talking about if something sprayed, spritzed on your tea kettle?
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, the kettle is on the stove all the time, whether we're cooking fleischiks or milchiks. And then we boil water on the inside of it. So if what gets on the outside of it matters, then what? So
you should definitely look. This is something, remember Tenke is the rabbi, but I can give you the basic outline. It depends where on the kettle it fell. Bottom line is the halacha over there talks about if it fell below the water level, meaning it fell that if you would take away the wall, it would go right into the water. So then it's batul b'shishim. It's only a problem if it fell on top, where it's just metal and hot metal. So then it spreads. So it depends how much it fell and where it fell. I will tell you that most of the time it turns out okay, except when it comes to Pesach, because the numbers are much less. There's no bittul by Pesach. But again, this is for everyone to thank you. But that's the background of that you should know how to ask the question.
If the kettle is not hot at the time, then it's not as relevant anyway.
Oh, of course not. Right. So only if it's hot. If it's hot and it's above the water level, unless the water, even if it's on the bottom where the water level is, but there's very little left, so you have to determine if there's enough water in there, 60 times the amount that fell on the tea kettle. I think somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you go back to the about the hard-boiled eggs?
Sure.
So is a hard-boiled egg kosher then? It doesn't matter how it was cooked?
No, it definitely needs to be Bishul Yisrael. You can only buy a hard-boiled egg with a hechsher. So if you go in 7-Eleven and you see those two little hard-boiled eggs there, with a hechsher, that means they took the time and effort to make sure that a Yisrael turned on the boiler or turned on that machine. You cannot go to a hotel and eat the hard-boiled eggs in the morning. Let's say, just assuming, well, it's an egg, what could be wrong? Now, I'll tell you practically, I travel often enough that, especially in the Hampton Inns, when they have these hard-boiled eggs, I always say, can you show me the container? Because they don't cook eggs in the back. They buy them hard-boiled, and almost all the time they bring out this container, a big container, a bucket actually, and it has an OU or whatever it is on it, because which is so it turns out many times it's kosher. The same thing in the airline lounges. Many times they have hard-boiled eggs. I ask them to bring it out, and many times it turns out to be kosher. That's the good news.
Okay, thank you.
Ron?
Well, thank you. I asked that question.
Also, I would like to get back to that question about how to look on the KINS website and find a video. I took a quick look a moment ago. There's a link at the top that says online learning. When you click on that, the next link says video shiurim library, and that's where you can search for any video that has ever been collected at KINS since the beginning, probably all the way back to March. Any other questions for Rabbi Fishbane?
I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
Yes.
What you mentioned regarding the tasting of something which you don't know is kosher. For a person who is a food professional in the industry, can a person actually taste different products and spit them out, assuming that you don't know their treif?
Taste it and spit it out. You mean this is the shach and saraches? If you're asking on a very practical level, without further research, I would say no. But there is a shach that talks about certain circumstances, and I have to look at the shach again and see how much of that is in a practical halacha. If a person's living is made off of, I don't know, tasting wine and swishing it around their mouth and spitting it out, it will be hard pressed to find a rav that will say, yeah, go ahead for it. So it needs further research, but that's what I would tell you. But you can start by looking over there in Saraches in the shop. I don't remember which sifkatan it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, then I will thank you all again, and a special thank you to Rabbi Fishbane, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.